The article I chose to use for my brand story, it's going to focus primarily on HBO's Game of Thrones, but the particular article was written about an advertisement that was played during the Super Bowl. It was a Bud Light ad to begin with, and then HBO's Game of Thrones hijacked the ad. So the title was Game of Thrones hijacks Bud Light Super Bowl ad to pump its return. Anheuser-Busch InBev makes ultimate sacrifice in ad partnership with HBO, killing one of its most visible pitchmen, the Bud Knight. So this was written by Suzanne Vranica. It was published on February 3rd, so just after the Super Bowl weekend. And this was published in the Wall Street Journal online, and I accessed this via Factiva. And the link to the article can be found below there. Okay, so HBO hijacks Bud Light Super Bowl commercial. Here's the background. Basically, HBO's Game of Thrones is entering its final season. The series has been full of drama around the quest for the throne, and entering the final season, HBO is asking, what would you do for the throne? In a bold move, Anheuser-Busch InBev SA allowed HBO to hijack its Super Bowl ad. The Dilly Dilly ad campaign pitchman, the Bud Knight, was violently killed in the advertisement. The ad aired during the Super Bowl and is thought to be part of a $20 million marketing blitz for the final season of HBO's Game of Thrones. The commercial production was a huge investment. Two top creative agencies were looped into the production, along with a Game of Thrones director, David Nutter, who directed the Red Wedding episode. Let's take a look at the actual commercial before we move forward with the analysis of the article.
It's a beautiful day for a joust.
Indeed. Sun's out. Got my lucky loincloth, cold Bud Light, comfy throne. I don't have the plague anymore.
Look, it's the Bud Knight.
Dilly dilly!
All right, let's tap this keg. Giddy up, Peanut!
So why partner? Well, HBO has set records ratings with the show. They want to leverage viewership this season to introduce other HBO shows. Since this is Game of Thrones' final season, they're hoping to introduce current viewers to new shows on the network. As far as Bud Light, they have been losing market share for several years, so the goal with this ad was to tap into the Game of Thrones buzz. And Game of Thrones is known for unexpected twists, so hijacking fit with the brand, with the HBO brand in that regard. And Bud Light's Dilly Dilly campaign was inspired by Game of Thrones, so it was a fit for the Bud Light brand as well. As a creative director from one of the agencies said, though, in regard to the similarities, we just had to add the grit. Collaboration is hard. It requires negotiation and compromise. The HBO marketing chief made it clear that the Bud Knight had to die. Bud Light pushed back on this risky plot, fearing criticism from an audience who likely expected lightheartedness from the brand. There was lots of negotiation for the plot. This 30-second ad was said to cost $5 million and was paid for by AB InBev. HBO paid for the production of the commercial. Promoting two brands in one ad is hard. Bud Light did so to opt into the cult-like following of Game of Thrones, and HBO wanted to pull out all the stops in order to leverage the current viewership of Game of Thrones and hopefully point them in the direction of new shows on HBO that are coming up. Now, to connect the article to course content, first I'll talk about brand elements, which is covered on page 30 of the text. Components of a brand, such as a name, logo, symbol, package design, or other characteristic that distinguishes the brand, are called brand elements. In the case of Game of Thrones, we can think of things such as the medieval setting, the way that they speak, the font that's used for the title and for advertisements, as well as the overall vibe of a dark, dreary, drama-filled series. These are all things that would be tied to the brand that we could describe as brand elements. Next, consumer-based brand equity. This started in the textbook in Chapter 2 on page 73. Basically, it is how a brand is viewed through a consumer perspective. And it's positive when a consumer reacts more favorably to a brand when the brand is identified versus when it would be like a blind taste test sort of situation if the brand was not identified. We know that Game of Thrones has a cult-like following, so I think it's safe to say that it has a positive consumer-based brand equity. Consumer-based brand equity exists when a consumer has a high level of awareness and familiarity with the brand and holds some strong, favorable, and unique brand association in their memory. It's important to note that somebody has to be aware of and familiar with the brand in order for them to have consumer-based brand equity. Finally, brand positioning, and this was covered on page 85. So to arrive at optimal competitive brand positioning, you must define and communicate the frame of reference or category membership. So in this case, we know that it's an HBO show, which is kind of known for being a high-end sort of television program. Limited access. You would have to have a subscription to HBO in order to even be able to view the show. We know that it has a mature rating, so it's racy, probably filled with drama, not something that would be suitable for work. So all of these things would help to define the category that this television show falls within. And then you must also establish points of parity and points of difference as well in order to position the brand effectively. So points of parity would be something that it has in common with in this case like another television show. Perhaps it's a drama, perhaps it's um, been along for a similar amount of time, perhaps it's targeted to the same type of audience. Those would be things that would maybe be points of parity, but maybe points of difference, as we covered in this particular article, might be something like Game of Thrones being known for unexpected outcomes or dramatic, violent scenes. That would be maybe something that sets it apart from other brands. So finally, to look at the discussion questions. Firstly, for this brand story, we reviewed a few brand elements of HBO's Game of Thrones. The article, however, also highlighted a Bud Light advertisement that Game of Thrones hijacked. What would you say are some of Bud Light's brand elements? And the second question here, do you think the cult-like Game of Thrones following felt positively or negatively about the mashup commercial between Game of Thrones and Bud Light? Use course concepts to explain your reasoning. And this is just a list of my image and video sources. Thank you so much for watching my brand story today.